Christianity is dying in Europe. Yes, the continent that sent missionaries all over the world to bring people to the religion is now slowly losing it themselves. Back in 1900, nearly 95% of Europe's population was some form of Christianity. Yet in 2020, that number was just 76%. And the reality is, it's actually much lower than this, because affiliation does not mean participation. For example, in Sweden, less than 20% of 15-year-olds attend confirmation, whereas compared to the 1970s, that number was 80%. Or if we're to look at Italy, home to many of the world's most influential religious figures, and with the Vatican City right in the center of Rome, nearly 80% of Italians say they're Catholic. Yet 31% never attend any services at all. And even if we're to look at a country like Poland, which many people think of as a very traditional Christian country, 84% identify as Catholic, yet only half of them say they're practicing. So what I'm saying is that 76% number is actually much, much lower. The biggest gains have been from the agnostics and atheists, who are more willing to identify as such because it doesn't carry the same stigma that it once did. Then there's also the Muslims, whose 9 million members in 1900 grew to more than 53 million, largely through migration from North Africa and the Middle East. But enough with all these stats. What has actually happened to Christianity in Europe? Well, like every cultural shift, there's many reasons. But to begin, I think we should go all the way back to where it first started from: the Protestant Reformation. Although the Reformation was intended as a revival and purification of Christianity in the early 16th century, the theological, cultural, and social shifts it set in motion had the long-term impact of indirectly contributing to the decline in religiosity. Magisterial reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin rejected the medieval concept of the church as superior to the state. Instead, they argued that political leaders equally perform the work of God, and do so directly, without the church as mediator. This not only laid the foundation for modern secular governance, where there's separation of church and state, but it also changed the view of how to serve God. Before, the highest form of Christian life was thought to be monkhood, living in seclusion and practicing prayer non-stop. The world was seen as a distraction from true holiness, creating a sharp divide between sacred and secular, which was literally everything else. But Martin Luther, for example, argued that all legitimate work could be a form of worship, hence the doctrine of vocation, which dignified secular life. The relevance of this is that it helped normalize a more individual, worldly form of religious expression, which over time contributed to less dependence on the church and more focus on personal or civic life. The next major turning point in the decline of Christianity was the 30 Years' War, which actually had its origins in the Reformation. The religious divisions created from it destabilized the Holy Roman Empire, and those unresolved tensions exploded into the war when Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II attempted to force Roman Catholicism on his subjects. Obviously, the war ended up becoming much more about power and territory in the end, but nevertheless, it disillusioned many with religion. This war caused unprecedented destruction across large parts of Central Europe, with an estimated death toll of 8 million. From the sheer scale of violence and suffering, it seemed that Christian churches, instead of offering peace, fueled the bloodshed. A strong state appeared to be the best way to protect society from religion's potential for conflict. As a result, the war helped set the stage for the Enlightenment period to come a few decades later. This was obviously devastating for Christianity. The Age of Enlightenment was an intellectual and philosophical movement that valued reason, science, and empirical observation over faith and tradition. This directly challenged the central premise of Christianity, that truth is revealed by God and transmitted through Scripture or the Church. The Enlightenment introduced the idea that ethics and morality could exist independent of religion, a radical shift from medieval thinking. While Christianity didn't appear overnight, the period planted the seeds of skepticism, individualism, and rationalism that slowly eroded Christianity's dominance over time. What came as a natural consequence of the Enlightenment period, occurring near its end, was the Industrial Revolution of Europe, which began around 1750 in Britain and spread to the rest of Europe in the 1800s. It led to rapid urbanization, to say the least, with millions of people moving from rural villages to crowded, chaotic cities. In these rural areas, the local church was the social center. But in the cities, people were exposed to diverse beliefs and ideologies. New social groups not bound by traditional religious norms formed. Public education systems also began to emerge in the 19th century, with governments gradually making education secular. As people moved from illiteracy to education, they were exposed to new ideas, especially scientific and philosophical, that challenged religious teachings. The next pivotal shift happened just a century later, during the post-World War II period. For starters, the sheer evil and destruction of World War I and II, coming from Europe itself, the so-called Christian continent, led many Europeans to lose faith in Christian moral authority. But there was also another side to this. There was a growing sense of guilt and moral reckoning about the brutality of colonial empires. Christianity in Europe was not just spiritually present in these empires. It was often seen as a justifying force, providing moral or civilizational language to back imperial domination. Even if not every church actively supported colonization, many failed to clearly oppose it or distanced themselves only in hindsight. As European societies became more self-critical in the late 20th century, especially during post-colonial reflection, Christianity became tainted by association, perceived as complicit in conquest, forced conversion, and cultural erasure. Many Europeans, especially the younger and educated classes, wanted to move past this all. They began to disengage from Christianity, not necessarily from belief in God, but from institutional religion itself. That basically leads us to today, where Christianity has continued on a downward spiral. It's interesting though when you look at the relative religiousness of the continent. Western Europe is incredibly secular, while Eastern Europe is still seen as retaining that Christian culture. Of course, the irony in all this is that it's the countries where communist regimes once repressed religious worship and promoted atheism, like Russia, Serbia, Romania, and Croatia, where it's now the strongest. This is especially visible in the Orthodox countries, as Catholicism in communist countries like Poland and Hungary had always remained strong, even under repression. Now, to many people, usually those on opposite sides of the political spectrum, there's additional reasons for the decline of Christianity today. For example, some traditionalists would say that Christianity is now watered down, that the churches have turned, quote, liberal, where everything goes. While the progressives would say the religion's decline is due to its exclusionary practices, stances, and discrimination, which in a highly secularized continent is a big deal. What both sides can definitely agree on though is that all the child abuse scandals the church has been involved in that have come to light over the years has definitely exacerbated people's negative perceptions of it. I mean, there's thousands upon thousands of cases, but that I fear may be too risky to get into detail about on YouTube. Regardless, as I said before, everywhere in Europe is seeing a decline in Christianity. The foundations set in the Enlightenment period are even more apparent today. See, secularization comes as part of the package of advanced modernity, and modernization is simply irreversible. As more and more areas of life organize themselves without recourse to religious authority, the sphere of religion is diminished. For example, going to church used to be a thing many people did. It was free, but people were able to buy a bike or take a bus for a weekend adventure. For unlimited distraction, we used to just watch TV. Better yet now, there's social media. When people have more options, churches lose out. Naturally, this means each generation is getting less and less religious. If we're to look at a chart of how young Europeans self-identify, most are barely religious. Keep in mind that this data is unfortunately from 2018, as there's nothing continent-wide that's newer, so it's even less now. If we're to look into more crazy revelations, in 2014, then Archbishop of Canterbury Rowan Williams stated that the UK had become a post-Christian country. That same year, only 4.3% of the population participated in a Church of England Christmas service. Meanwhile, figures from the German Bishops' Conference have shown over 500,000 people left the Catholic Church in 2022, and that figure rises to 700,000 if you include deaths. It's significant as Germany is Europe's wealthiest country, the heartland of the Reformation, and historically home to large Catholic and Lutheran populations. Dwindling membership means the Catholic Church may have to give up a third of its properties, with churches potentially facing demolition. This process has already been well underway in the Netherlands, a country where more than half the population aged 15 and older have declared no religious affiliation. leaving many priests burnt out and demoralized. Now, with all that being said, I think the idea that Christianity will eventually die out in Europe isn't really the right way to phrase it. Rather, it'll eventually transform into more of a cultural institution than an organized, value-based doctrine. Let me explain. If we're to look at France, for example, this is a country passionately secular. In fact, the term laïcité is a specific form of secularism that's a core constitutional principle enshrined in French law. It means the state is prohibited from recognizing any religion, religion is strictly separated from public institutions, and anything related to religion is even restricted in public spaces. For almost a century until 1960, France was consistently 97% Catholic. Yet today, only 25% identify as it, while the irreligious make up more than half the population now. Despite all this though, there's still a lot of traditions that happen in churches, even if it doesn't make people religious. Weddings, funerals, the public holidays of Christmas and Easter, these are all still celebrated, even if it's by those who haven't stepped foot in a church for decades. In that sense, Christianity will live on forever. But even in this sense, there has been some decline. Alternative baby naming ceremonies are gradually becoming more common, replacing the traditional baptisms. The number of civil weddings outstripped Catholic ceremonies for the first time in Italy in 2018, which had already happened in the UK in 1992. In Spain, the numbers are truly crazy. 2009 was the first year that civil weddings had narrowly overtaken religious weddings at a 54 to 46% split. Yet by 2018, it became 80-20, a far cry from what was a strongly Catholic land in the days of Franco. The good news at the end of the story for all the Christian viewers here is that although Christianity is massively diminishing in Europe, that's not the case globally. In fact, the percentage of the world that is Christian has changed very little over the last 120 years. In 1900, 34.5% of the world was Christian. In 2020, the figure is 32.3%. This relative stability, however, masks dramatic changes in Christianity's demographics. According to this chart below and my hopeful accurate math calculations, just 22.4% of Christians globally are located in Europe today. Yet that number was 70% in 1900. Now, Africa's been the continent with the most Christians since 2018, surpassing Latin America, which, by the way, had surpassed Europe in 2014. By 2060, it's predicted that not a single country in Europe will be on the list of the 10 countries with the largest Christian population. So, to end this video, I think it's fitting to finish with a quote from Father Joseph Ratzinger, better known as Pope Benedict XVI. From the crisis of today, the church of tomorrow will emerge, a church that has lost much. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you think the future has in store for Christianity in Europe. Don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this, and I'll see you in the next one.